Winter came down early on Aldermere that year, and by St. Hilary's Day the high woods above the valley stood locked in a white and brittle silence. Emeric, Duke of Rathmore, rode out into it with 11 men behind him and a pack of hounds spilling ahead, and he took no joy in any of it. He hunted now the way he did most things, because the calendar asked it, and because a man in the saddle need not sit at a table and be spoken to. The cold suited him. It asked nothing. They had been out above an hour, and the pack had struck nothing worth the name, when the old dog Bracken left the line. He was the last of the old Duke's breeding, a great rough hound the color of wet slate, grave and grizzled about the muzzle, and in 9 seasons he had never once broken from a scent. Now he stopped dead in the snow, lifted his heavy head, and swung it slowly toward the black tangle of the frostwood where no sensible creature went in winter. Then he began to run, not baying, not hunting, but running low and hard and silent, the way a dog runs toward a thing, and not after it. "Leave him," said Mr. Crail from his neat brown cob. The steward did not care to lose a good morning to a senile dog. "He's winded a dead deer. He'll come back when he's rolled in it." But Emeric had already turned his horse. He could not afterward have said why. Something in the set of the old dog's shoulders had reached him under the boredom, and for the first time in a long while he found he was curious, and being curious he followed. Bracken led him the better part of half a mile into the frostwood, to a hollow where a frozen beck ran out beneath a lip of gray stone, and there the hound stopped and would not be called on. He had planted himself over a heap of gray rags, half drifted in the snow, and he was licking at them, and whining low in his chest, a sound Emeric had never once heard the old dog make in all his life. The rags were a girl. She lay curled against the cold stone as though she had crept in out of the wind and simply stopped. Her lips were the color of a bruise. Her dark hair had frozen in ropes to the ground. She wore no cloak worth the name, and her feet, when Emeric knelt and reached her, were bound in rag worn near through to the skin. He set 2 fingers to the side of her throat and felt nothing at all, and then, faint and far under the ice of her, a pulse, slow and stubborn and refusing. "She lives," he said. "Barely. Crail, your coat." The steward was slow to give it, and it was as Emeric bent to gather her up that he saw the cord. It was a plain leather thong, knotted behind her neck, and it had worked up out of the collar of her ruined gown, and on it, warmed against the hollow of her frozen throat, hung a ring. He knew it before his mind would let him know it. He had seen it his whole life in a portrait, in the long hall, on the painted hand of a woman, 30 years dead. A broad old band of red gold, worn thin with handling, set with a single flawed sapphire the color of deep water, and cut into the gold around the stone, if a man knew to look for them, 3 small alder leaves. The betrothal ring of the House of Rathmore, given to the promised bride of the heir in every generation for 200 years, and gone, worse than gone, unspoken of, since the winter his brother died. Emeric had last seen it the night they brought him word that Cassian was dead. It had not been under the roof of Aldermere from that day to this one, and here it lay against the throat of a half-frozen beggar girl in the deep of the frostwood, warm from her own skin, while his father's old hound stood over her and bared his teeth at any man who came a step too near. "Give her here," Emeric said, and his voice was not entirely his own. Old Osric had come up by then. The butler still rode out with the hunt, as he had for 40 years. And the old man looked down from his saddle at the ring on its cord, and the blood went out of his face, and then his face went very carefully, empty in the way of a servant who has seen a thing he was never meant to see. "Your Grace," he said low. "That is, I know what it is." They bound her in 3 coats, and Emeric carried her against his chest the whole long cold ride down, and the hound ran at his stirrup every step and would not be sent ahead. Word outruns horses. By the time they came into the courtyard, the household had gathered on the steps in the raw noon light, and they watched their silent, grieving master come home from the hunt with a dead-looking village girl in his arms and his dead brother's ring at her throat, and not one of them dared open a mouth. They put her in the blue room, which had not been unshuttered in 3 years, and sent to Netherby for the physician. He came and did what little he could, and shook his head, and named a fever he had no cure for, and said she would very likely be gone before the morning. Krail stood a while in the doorway of the blue room, looking at the small, still shape lost in the great bed, and something moved behind his soft, pale eyes that was a long way from pity. "A vagrant, with a dead man's ring about her neck," he said to the butler, quiet, as the physician packed his bag. "However she came by it, she'll not last the week. And whatever tale she means to tell will go down into the ground along with her, which for the peace of this house is as well." He smiled, his soft pink smile. "Some stories are kinder buried." Osric said nothing. He was a spare, upright, iron-gray man of 60, who had served 3 dukes, and he had learned young where to keep the things he saw. But he was thinking, as he watched the old hound Bracken refuse the warm kitchen and lie down instead across the threshold of the blue room with a groan like a shutting door, that in 9 years he had never once seen that dog go willingly to any living soul who did not carry Rathmore blood. He put the thought away, in the place where he kept such things, and went down himself to see that a fire was fed in that room all the night through. She did not die by morning, nor by the morning after that. On the 3rd day, the fever broke like a fist unclenching, and she opened her eyes in a blue silk room the size of the whole cottage she had been born in, and understood 2 things in the same breath: that she was not dead, and that she was in very great danger. Her name was Elowen Coombe. She was 19 years old, and she had walked the better part of 200 miles to the back end of a hard winter to give back a ring, and she had told no living soul the truth of why, because the truth was the kind a girl like her did not survive the telling of. Her mother had been the wise woman of a marsh village called Wyburn, a setter of bones and a reader of fevers, sent for quietly by night and cut dead in the lane by day. Elowen had learned everything the woman knew, and her mother had died in the fall of the year, of a wasting in the chest, and at the very last, when her voice was nearly spent, she had pressed the old sapphire ring into Elowen's palm and folded the girl's fingers shut over it with the strength the dying are not supposed to have. "Carry it back to Aldermere," she had breathed, "to the alder house above the valley. Give it into the hand of the Rathmore that keeps faith, and into no other hand, mind me, no matter who asks. Tell them who I was. Tell them I never—" But what it was, her mother had never done. Elowen never learned. The breath went out of her on that one word and carried the end of the story off with it, and left her daughter holding a ring worth a manor and a sentence she could not finish. So Elowen had come north on a dead woman's word, with an heirloom she could not account for, to a house of strangers who would reach the only conclusion the world ever reached. A village girl with a duke's ring was a thief, and a thief was ruined, past all saving, and either way, the ring would be prized from her hand and her mother's last charge broken past mending. She had meant to come to the servant's door quietly, to find some honest, kindly underservant, and to learn without seeming to ask who in that great house kept faith, then to lay the ring in that one right hand and be 3 counties gone before anyone thought to wonder at her name. She had not meant to be carried in through the front of it, half a corpse, with the whole household on the steps and the ring already seen and marked by every eye in the yard. The wonder was that she still had it at all. When she woke, her mother's ring still hung at her own throat, for the one man who might have claimed his family's troth could not bring himself to lift it from a dying stranger's neck, any more than he could enter the east wing or speak his brother's name. What the Duke would not touch, no one under him had dared. Now she lay in the great blue bed, weak as spilled water, and made the same bargain with the world she had been making her whole life. She would say nothing. She would give nothing away. She would be small and quiet and useful and watchful, and she would keep her mother's ring and her mother's secret sewn into the hem of her shift until she was certain, wholly certain, whose was the hand that kept faith. She did not yet know that in a house like Aldermere, for a girl like her, there was no such thing left in the world as staying unseen. They let her stay on while she mended, because the Duke had said she was to, and no one under that roof cared to ask him why. A truckle bed was made up for her in a narrow room off the still-room passage, and there Elowen lay out the short gray days, and slowly got the strength back into her limbs. And because she had spent the whole of her life reading sickness and living things, she could not stop herself reading it in the house. It was a beautiful house, that was the pity of it. Aldermere Hall stood long and low and silver-stoned above its own frozen valley, a house that had grown up out of the land across 200 years, rather than been set down upon it. And it was ailing, and it took Elowen less than a week to find where, because a great house sickens the way a body does, quietly, from the parts that no one troubles to look at. The finest rooms stood shuttered and shrouded, and the shut rooms breathed damp, which meant a roof stood open to the weather somewhere overhead and had done for a season and more. The still room, the beating heart of any house, where its medicines and cordials and winter preserves are made, stood cold and locked, its shelves gray with dust, its herbs 3 years dead in the jar. What had once been a physic garden below the south wall was a black square of frozen nettles. Half the maids went about with the low winter fever in them and dosed it with nothing, because there was no one left in the house whose place it was to dose them. The cook, a broad, tired, decent woman named Mrs. Mata Pennell, stood weeping over a barrel of salt beef, come in green and slick, which she could not send back, for Mr. Crail settled with the victuallers, and Mr. Crail was not a man to be corrected by a cook. "And who," Elowen asked her gently, "is Mr. Crail the agent?" "The steward, rose to have the running of it all when the old master died, and Mrs. Yardley, that was housekeeper, went into the churchyard the winter following. There's been no housekeeper since, only Mr. Crail, that holds the keys of every door and the reckoning of every account, and answers to no living soul but the master, and the master won't be troubled. Mrs. Monick." Pennell wiped her red hands down her apron. "There's no mistress here at all, child, and hasn't been since the old Duchess died. There was to have been one, the young lord that was, Lord Cassian, the master's elder brother. He was to bring a lady home, but he died, sudden, and whoever the lady was, she never came, and not a soul here will say her name nor his. His Grace has not set foot in the East Wing since, nor let his brother be spoken of at his own table. He signs whatever Mr. Crail lays before him, and looks at nothing, and grieves, and the house goes cold around him. A house where one man holds all the keys and answers to no one, thought Elowen, is a house being quietly eaten alive. She had seen the shape of it, in miniature in her own village, in the bailiff who kept the poor box and grew fat while the poor grew thin, but she said none of it aloud. She was a stranger with a perilous secret sewn into the hem of her shift, and she had walked 200 miles to give back one ring and disappear, not to physic a duke's rotting house back to life. So she folded her hands and learned the servants' names and held her tongue. She held it for exactly 11 days. The Dowager Duchess of Rathmore kept to the south sitting room, the one room in all that cold house that was reliably warm. And there she sat out her days by a banked fire with a rug across her knees and a back like a ship's mast, and missed nothing that happened beneath her roof. Her name was Sidoney. She was 81 years old, and she had buried a husband, 2 sons, and a grandson, and had not let any one of them bend her. Her hands had gone to knots with the years. Her eyes had gone nowhere at all. She had naturally heard everything. That the beggar girl her grandson carried home out of the frostwood had failed to die as the steward foretold, and had instead risen from her sickbed and inside a fortnight physicked half the maids' hall back onto its feet. That little Tibby's quinsy had broken under a poultice no one had asked for. That the still room, 3 years dark, now showed a candle under its door at odd hours of the night. Nothing came quickly to the dowager, but everything reached her in the end, and she turned each piece of it slowly over in the patient dark of her mind. On the 11th day, she sent her woman to fetch the girl. Alowan came in braced against a great many things, and found instead a very small old woman who looked at her for the length of one slow breath and then said, "Sit, there, where the light is on your face. I am too old to be talking to a shadow." Alowan sat. "They tell me," said the dowager, "that you have been curing my servants without leave, out of a room you had no business unlocking, with simples that are not your own. That is, theft and trespass, and the practice of physic without a license. 3 charges to answer for, and not yet breakfast." The old eyes did not blink. "I have not sent for the magistrate. I have sent for you. Well, the room was cold, and the people in it were sick, your grace," Alowan said. "I could not see the one and let the other be." "Could you not?" It was not a question. Sidney studied her. "You broke Tibby's quinsy with a pennyweight of figs and mustard, told no one, and asked for nothing." "Why nothing?" "Because a girl who asks for nothing is not looked at," Alowan thought, and did not say it. "There was nothing I wanted, ma'am. Everyone wants something. The ones who swear otherwise want it worst." Then, in a different voice, quieter and far older, she said, "You have been under my roof some weeks now, girl, and you have the wit to use your eyes. I have little time left for tact, and none for being lied to. Kindly tell me what you have seen, the whole of it." And because there is a particular relief in being asked a true thing by someone who wants the true answer, Alowan told her. The damp in the shut rooms and the open roof above, the ruined still room and dead garden, the green beef the cook dared not send back, the one man who held every key and answered to no one. She told it plainly, and the old woman's face did not move. When she had done, Sidoni was silent a long while. "My grandson is not a fool," she said at last. "He is a grieving man, which from the outside wears the very same coat, though beneath it is a different animal. He has handed one man the run of this house because he cannot bear to touch what his brother left. That is his weakness, and it has grown expensive." She lifted her chin. "You know something of healing, something of husbandry, and a great deal, I think, of holding your tongue. I mean to make you useful, not as a stray my grandson keeps out of guilt, but as mistress of that still room, that garden, and the health of every soul on this land, under my authority, which is older in this house than Mr. Crail's." "We shall see," she added, almost to herself, "what you turn out to be." Alowan's heart went still at the last of it, but the dowager had already turned her face back to the fire. "They wagered below stairs that you would not last the week," the old woman said. "My grandson said a month. I should dearly like before I die to prove him wrong to his face just once more. Go and prove the whole pack of them wrong, and be quick about it. I have not the patience left to wait long for anything now." Alowan rose, and curtsied, and had her hand on the door when the dowager spoke again without turning her head. "Girl, the thing you came here, carrying a pause that stopped the breath in Alowan's chest. You will tell me of it when you are ready, and not one moment before. I have waited 3 years already. I can wait a little longer yet for the truth to walk to me on its own 2 feet. Alowan went out into the cold passage with her heart slamming against her ribs, and could not have said whether she had found a protector or a snare, and understood, as the door closed, that the old woman had meant her not to know. Alowan used them, the leave, the 11 days grown quietly into a month, the small, hard-won scrap of authority, the only way she had ever trusted, not by argument. She had never once in her life won anything by arguing. She meant instead to weave herself so far into the working of the house that one morning it would wake and find it could not remember how it had managed before her, and the question of whether a beggar girl belonged there would simply stop meaning anything at all. She began with the still room. because a still room is a house's conscience kept in glass. She scoured it from the rafters down. She carried out 3 years of spoiled syrup and mouse-falled flour, scrubbed the deal table back to white, and kept a little grate lit until the cold had sweated out of the walls. On the high back shelf she found the old remedies of the house in a careful faded hand. Mrs. Yardley's, the maid, said the housekeeper. 3 winters in the ground, cough electuaries and cordials, and a rose salve, everyone gone to ruin. Lowen washed each jar clean but left the labels whole, for it seemed to her a small cruelty to scrape away the handwriting of a dead woman, whose whole work had been to keep other people well. Beside them, she laid her own mother's physic roll, a worn strip of linen, pocketed and tied, that had carried its seeds and dried simples 200 miles. And for the first time since Wyburn she felt something in her go steady and come home. Nothing mends in the dark, her mother had always said, meaning a wound you would not unwrap, or a grief you would not name, or a room you would not open. Lowen threw back the shutters, let the hard white winter light into the still room, and set to work. Herbs, in the deep of the year, she took where she could get them. She dug what the frozen garden still hid, a comfrey crown, a stand of stubborn rue, and went into the wood she could already read like print, and came home with bark and haws and the last black elder. What she could not gather, she coaxed out of the house's own forgotten stores, and inside a fortnight the shelves were filling once more. Fever draughts, a cough syrup for the maids, a green salve, a sleeping tincture of hop and wild lettuce and lavender. The sickness went back before her the way water draws back from a turning tide. Tibby was first on her feet and made herself Lowen's shadow and second pair of hands. The rest of the maids followed. Then it went out past the walls. Nairn, the head groom, a shut-mouthed, iron-hard Northman of 50, who had borne an ulcered leg in silence a whole year sooner than pay the Netherby physician to shake his head over it. Let her dress it one morning, disbelieving, and within 3 weeks walked without the limp he had thought to carry into his grave. After that Nairn touched his hat to Lowen, as he would to a mistress. The tenants heard. They always hear. A carter's boy down at Cindermore took the croup, and his mother sent up to the kitchen door in the dead of night for the girl that mends folk. Lowen went on foot through the snow, and sat till dawn with the child, breathing steam over her basin, and the boy lived. By Candlemas there was a small worn path to the kitchen door, and the people at the end of it did not ask for the physician nor for the steward. They asked for Eowyn, and wherever she went the old hound went at her side. Bracken had left his post at the blue room door, the day she rose from it, and fixed himself to her, as though the duty had been handed down to him, and would not be argued out of it. He lay across the still-room threshold while she worked, walked at her knee to Cindermore and back, and slept outside whatever door she slept behind. The servants spoke of it low, for they all knew what Osric knew, that in 9 years the old dog had gone willingly to no one but Rathmore blood, and had bared his teeth at duchesses. "He knows summat we don't," said Nairn once, watching the great grey head track the girl across the yard, and nobody laughed, because every one of them had thought the same. The Duke noticed her the way a man notices the weather turn, without meaning to. And then, all at once. He never went near the still room or the kitchen, but he could not help remarking that his house had stopped smelling of sickness and damp, and begun to smell faintly of marigold and warm beeswax, and that its great cold silence had changed its quality, and sat less like a hell breath. The thing that undid him was smaller than any of these, and he never knew her hand was in it until Osric told him. He had not slept a night clean through since the spring his brother died. He lay in the dark with the accounts he would not read and the east wing he would not enter, and wore those 3 years on his face like a long sickness. Osric, who had dressed 3 dukes and loved this one past all sang, went one evening to the still room, stood in the door, and asked the girl outright whether there was anything in her craft for a man who could not sleep and would not be seen to want the help. Lowen asked no questions. She made up a pillow of dried hop and lavender and a small, dark bottle to stand by his water, and gave them to Osric, and said only, "Tell him it is for the room, not for him. He will take a thing for a room that he would never take for himself." The Duke of Rathmore slept that night the whole night through, for the first time in 3 years. He woke not knowing why, only that the iron band about his skull had loosened a single turn, and lay a while in the grey dawn, almost afraid to move, the way a man goes carefully around a truce. "What have you done to this room?" he said to Osric, not quite an accusation. "Nothing, your grace," said Osric, with the calm of 40 years. Miss Combe thought the air wanted sweetening. Emmerich said nothing to that. But 3 days after, he came upon her by accident, the only way he came upon anyone that year, in the long north passage, a basket of drying bunches on her hip, and a smear of green salve at her wrist. She stood aside for him against the wall, her eyes down as a servant should. He went past her. Then he stopped. "You are the one from the Frostwood," he said. "The one Bracken found." "Yes, your grace." He looked at her. Properly. For the first time since he had carried her half dead against his chest. Now that she was upright and dry, and it was daylight, she was small and plain and brown, the kind of woman a room forgets it has seen. Except that when she raised her eyes to answer him, they were level and gray and clear and wholly without fear of him, and he had not been looked at in that way by a living soul in 3 years. His servants looked at the floor. His grandmother looked straight through him. This girl looked at him as though he were simply a man who had asked a question, and she had the answer, and was weighing how much of it he was strong enough to be told. It unsettled him. He was not used to being seen. "They are calling you the mender, down in the village," he said. "For the sake of saying something. People will call a thing by what it does, your grace." He almost very nearly smiled. He had not done that in longer than he could say. "And what do you mend when you have run out of coughs and cut fingers?" She held his eye a moment longer than was quite safe, and something moved behind the gray of it that he could not read. "Whatever has been too long let alone," she said. "It is only ever the one sickness, sir, under all its different names. A thing left untended does not sit quiet and wait. It goes bad in the dark." Then she curtsied and took up her basket and went on down the passage with the old hound falling in at her heel, and the Duke stood where he was a moment longer than he had meant to, and did not entirely understand why his own house felt, all at once, a little less like a tomb. Alowan felt his eyes on her back the whole length of the passage. "There is a good man in there," she thought, buried alive under 3 years of not looking. And then she thought of the hidden ring, and her mother's charge she had not yet dared to keep, and the one question that ran under all the others as she moved through that reviving house, "Which of you keeps faith?" And she told herself firmly that a grieving duke was no business of hers. She had come to give back a ring and disappear. She had not come to raise a dead house back to life. She very nearly believed it. Let us pause here just a moment. If you would like to see how a hidden ring and a hidden theft come apart in the very same week, and what the old hound had known all along, take a moment to subscribe before we go on. The dowager's leave had given Eowyn the still room, the stores, and the health of the house, and with them a small plain book, in which she set down what came in at the door and what was paid for it, week by week. A still room reckoning is a humble thing, far beneath a steward's notice. But a house is a single body, and a woman with her finger on one vein can feel the whole heart strain. She kept it in her own hand and told no one. What the chandler had for his wax, what the carrier was paid for his journeys, what the druggist at Netherby charged for the few things she could not brew herself. And within a month, her figures had begun to quarrel with the houses. She had it first from the wax. The chandler settling at the door showed her his own tally stick without a thought, 11 shillings the quarter, and grateful for the custom. But the reckoning Mr. Crail posted on the servants' board. For form's sake, put that same chandler at £1.16. Eloin stood in the cold passage and looked at the two figures a long time, and did not lay a finger on the sheet, and said nothing to a living soul, for she had years of practice at saying nothing. Then it was the beef, and the coals, and the carrier. Then it was the roof above the east wing, entered as mended last autumn for £30, the very roof she had stood beneath a week since and watched let the grey sky through in 4 places. Then it was the rents. At Cindermore, the widow Harlow's rent had been raised a whole shilling at Michaelmas for the mending of a roof that had never once been touched, and the old woman paid it, and blessed the master for his forbearance, and did not like to trouble his grief. This was no servant pocketing spoons. This was a man robbing a house from its roots patiently, in good ink, while its master grieved above stairs and would not look. Crail had waited for exactly such a house. No mistress, no housekeeper, a master who would sign anything sooner than open his dead brother's ledgers. He had settled into it the way rot settles into a sound beam. But she had to be certain, and certainty lay in the office. The chance came on a raw grey afternoon when Crail rode to the Netherby sessions, and the great store press at the end of the North Passage wanted counting. The storeroom and the estate office shared a wall there and a door between them, and that afternoon the door stood unlocked. Eloin told herself she was only counting sheets. She stood in the office doorway and did not step across it, but on the near shelf, shoved in behind the current books, lay an old field book, its cover gone soft with handling, and the year stamped on its spine was the year the Duke's brother died. The same year she had learned by now that Mr. Brand, Crail, had taken the whole estate into his own hand. She lifted it down. Set. She turned to the back where a careful man keeps what he does not care to post, and read down the cramped accounts of that long-ago spring. Small moneys paid out, quietly, to be rid of things, a horse sold, a physician settled with. And there, halfway down the page, a single line that stopped the breath in her throat, a sum laid out, to see the Wyburn woman gone out of the county. And no more. Said of it, Wyburn, her mother's village, her mother. And out in the passage behind her, the outer door of the office scraped open. She had the old book back on its shelf, corner to corner as she had found it, and was 3 steps deep in the storeroom with a slate in her hand and a number on her lips, when Mr. Diney. Crail came in from the passage with the rain still black on his shoulders. "Miss Coombe?" He stopped in the connecting doorway and looked at her, and at the store press, and at the office door standing open behind her, and his soft pink face arranged itself slowly into a smile. "You keep long hours, for a still-room maid." Her Grace wished the linen counted before Lady Day. She did not lift her eyes from the slate. 24 pair of Holland sheets stand on the account. I find 19 whole. It makes a poor reckoning. She let him hear the word, reckoning, flat and plain, and did not look up to watch it land, but she felt him go still in the doorway. "You are grown very busy," he said, "for a girl who came to us with nothing but a fever and a borrowed ring." The smile did not move. "So many accounts of a sudden, the kitchen book, the still-room book, the linen. One does wonder that a mender of coughs should carry such a head for figures. Idle hands, sir." She set the slate down at last and met him, level and gray. "Her Grace keeps me busy. Her Grace—" Crail came a soft step nearer, light on his feet for so heavy a man. "Her Grace is 180, Miss Coombe. She has been very good to you. But the old do not last, and their favor does not outlive them, and a wise young woman looks to the season after this one." He tilted his head. "All kindness. You have no people, no name worth the saying, no place in the world but the one this house lends you, week by week. That is a cold position for a girl in winter. I should be sorry, very sorry to see you turned out into it before your time. Over some small misunderstanding, say, some question of a thing gone missing. A ring, perhaps, that was never hers to keep. There, It was, under the smile, for half a heartbeat, not menace, but fear. He had come in, smiling to frighten her, and it was his own fright that had walked him across the room, because a girl with a slate and a level eye had been standing too near his open door. He was afraid of her. "I keep honest books, Mr. Prank."
"Cray,"
she said pleasantly. "It is the one thing I have ever done that no one wished me to stop. Good evening." And she walked out past him with her slate, and her hands did not begin to shake until she was around the turn of the stair. It was not the threat that shook her. She had been threatened by harder men than Crail. It was the line in the book, burning behind her eyes. The money paid out, one cold spring, to see her own mother driven from the county and silenced for good. Her mother paid off like a bad debt, struck out of a great house's history for the price of a middling horse, by the soft pink man who was now robbing that same house blind, and who had just, smiling, promised to pin the theft of a ring upon her if she did not go quiet. She understood then, on the cold stare, that the theft and the ring were not two secrets, but one. The man who had emptied Aldermere's coffers these 3 years was the same man who had emptied her mother's life at the very start of them. Whatever her mother had been to this house, whatever "tell them who I was" had meant, Crail had good reason to want the daughter silent, the ring buried, and the whole matter as he had written in his own hand, no more said. She could not go to the Duke, every way she turned it that night. By her single candle she could not. To go to the Duke was to stand in the light and say, "I am the daughter of a woman, your steward paid to vanish, and here is your brother's ring, which I have carried hidden these 3 months." A grieving man would hear only that a beggar had crept in with his dead brother's ring sewn in her hem, and every poisoned word Crail had dropped in his ear would sound like plain sense. She would be a thief by nightfall, turned off with a bad name, traced, undone, the ring taken, her mother's charge broken forever, and the theft rolling on in the good ink of a locked book, a rumor Crail could laugh away. A half-told tale he could bury with her. She needed the whole of it, the true accounts beside the false in daylight, with witnesses who could not be waved aside, and she needed, God help her, to understand her own mother's story before she dared breathe a word of it aloud. 2 days after, the Dowager sent her down to Cindermore with a basket of physic, for the widow Harlow, whose chest was bad. The cottage roof was a sieve. A bucket stood in the middle of the floor to catch the wet, and the old woman coughed on her stool beneath it, and would not hear a word against the hall. "Mr. Boot, Crail says his Grace has need of the extra shilling," she said, folding her swollen hands. "And his Grace is a good man that lost his brother, poor soul. I'll not grudge him a shilling. Only," she looked up at the dark stain spreading over her ceiling, "only I do wonder the roof's not mended, that I've paid the mending of these 2 years past. But I'll not trouble his Grace with it, not with his grief." Elowen stood in the leaking cottage, with the basket in her hands, and looked at the old woman troubling nobody, and was ashamed to the bone, because that was the whole of it, that was the engine. Crail had never needed to be clever, only patient, and safe in the knowledge that everyone about him was too good, or too frightened, or too loyal to a grieving master to say the plain word aloud. A house full of decent, silent, grieving people, being quietly gutted, and every last one of them being good about it, herself most of all. She went home, and washed the basket, and made up her mind. She would build it, the way she built a cure. Slowly, from the roots, one true thing at a time. She would gather the tradesmen's own tallies under the honest cover of the kitchen accounts. She would have the tenants set their marks to what they truly paid. She would learn, however she could, what had happened in this house the spring the young lord died. And when she had it whole, the theft and the ring and the truth of the Wyburn woman, all of it in daylight and past, denying she would carry it into the light herself, and be, for the first time in her careful life, entirely and dangerously seen. But not yet, not until it was whole. A thing half built, she knew better than anyone, was worse than nothing at all. The still room was the first room in that house to come back to life, and life, once it starts, will not be kept to a single room. It began with the dog. Bracken had taken to lying across the still room threshold of an evening, and where the old Hound went, the Duke's eye followed, and one raw night in February the Duke followed the eye, walking the cold house as he did when he could not sit still. Past the shut east wing he never entered, until he came to the one door with warm light beneath it, and the smell of drying herbs, and stopped, and after a while came in. He did not say why. He said the passage was cold. He took the stool by the little grate and watched her string yarrow to the beam, and Bracken laid his great head on the Duke's knee, and none of the three of them spoke for the better part of an hour. When he rose to go, he seemed easier than she had seen him. He came again 2 nights later, and then, by no arrangement either would have owned to, he came most evenings, and she was most evenings there, and the still room became a country the two of them shared. He was, she found, exactly what his grandmother had named him, not cold, but drowning, a dry, careful humor, and a great buried gentleness gone all to grief beneath the shut face, the way a garden goes to nettles when no one can bear to walk in it. He learned, without meaning to, the names of her simples, and talked a little more each night, of small things first, and then of larger ones. He spoke of his brother, once, only once. It was late, and the fire was low, and Bracken slept against his boot, and he said, not looking at her, "This was Cassian's dog. Did you know that? Out of the old Duke's last litter, and given to my brother as a pup, and he has outlived him, which no one thought he would." He set his hand to the gray head. "He would not eat, the year Cassian died. We thought we should lose him too. And then this winter he walks out into the frostwood and carries home. You." He was quiet a moment. "He has gone to no stranger since my brother died, not once in 3 years. I have wondered why he went to you." Lowen's hands went still on the yarrow. She did not say, "I have wondered the same." "Dogs remember what we let ourselves forget, sir," she said carefully. A kindness, a voice, a hand held out, and she thought, though she could not have said why, of her mother. Emmerich looked into the fire. "My brother was to have married," he said. "It was broken off. I had a hand in the breaking. I believed, a thing I was told, and I carried it to him, and he stopped. He did not fight the fever. That spring, a man shown that the one soul he trusted was false, does not fight very hard to live. I was 22. I thought I was guarding the family. I have not been able to think of it since, without wishing, the years back." He turned the shut look on her, and for the first time she saw all the way down it, to the boy who had carried a lie to his brother, and buried him for it. "I cannot think why I am telling you this." "Because I asked you nothing," she said gently. "It is easier to set a heavy thing down where no one is reaching to take it." He almost smiled. "My grandmother says you keep the whole house breathing. The fires, the sick, the tenants, the tables. She says the half of it is you, and not her authority at all." A pause. "Why? You owe this house nothing. It near did for you, getting here." It was the question she could not answer whole without answering all of it. The ring, the woman, the thing she was still building in the dark. So she gave him a true thing that was not the whole thing, because a house ought not die of a grief that no one will unwrap, she said. "I cannot abide a hurt left to spoil that might yet be healed. It is my besetting fault. I would physic a graveyard given leave." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I begin to believe you would." It was the dowager who made the thing official in the way that old women do, which is without asking anyone's leave. One gray afternoon she had her woman bring a japanned box from the press in the south parlor, and when Lowen came for her hour of reading, the box lay open on the table, and inside it lay a great ring of keys, a dozen and more, iron and brass, bright at the wards, with 200 years of turning. The keys of Aldermere. Iloan knew them for what they were the instant she saw them, for a healer's daughter raised to a household knows a housekeeper's keys the way a soldier knows a sword. These were Mrs. Wiley's, said the dowager, and hung by the still-room door until she died. Then Mr. Prail took them up for safe-keeping, he said, and locked them in his office, and my grandson was too far sunk in grief to see what it meant, that a man who holds all the keys of a house holds the house. I have got them back. Do not ask me how. I am 1 in 80, and I keep my methods. They are yours now, on your person, at your waist, where every soul under this roof can see them and know who turns them. And when the day comes that a certain man tries to take them off you, you hold fast. Iloan took the keys. They were heavier than she had thought. She wore them from that hour at her waist, beside her mother's physic roll, and their small iron music went before her down every passage of Aldermere, and week by week the house learned the sound and began at the sound of it to remember how to be a house. Crail heard it too. She saw his face the first time she passed him in the hall with the keys ringing at her hip, and the smile was still fixed there, but it had gone tight at the corners like a seam about to give. She wore them the evening. The Duke next came to the still-room, and he looked at them a long moment bright against her grey gown, and something crossed his face she could not read. Grief, or the memory of another woman who ought to have worn them. "My grandmother gave you those," he said. "She did, your grace. I told her the county would talk. Let it." Cassian used to say, "A house cannot be run on a man's signature, that it wants a woman's eye and a woman's keys, or it goes bad from the inside while the master signs his name to the ruin of it." I did not understand him then. I have signed a great deal this year I never troubled to read. Iloan's heart went still. It was the nearest he had come to the thing she was building, figure by figure in her locked drawer. "Then perhaps," she said, "your grace ought to begin reading again." For a moment she thought he would ask her outright what she knew. But he was not ready, and neither in truth was she. The case not yet whole, the ring still hidden away in her box, the woman in the story still without a name she dared say. The moment passed, the fire settled, and they sat on in the warm dark, each holding a piece of the same broken truth, and neither willing yet to lay it on the table between them. She built the rest of it at night, when the house slept, the tradesmen's tallies, the tenants' marks, copied fair in her own hand and hidden in a false bottom she had cut into her workbox, under the darning wool. Twice Crail nearly took her at it, and twice she gave him nothing to hold. He had built his whole quiet theft upon there being no one in the house who looked, or listened, or wrote things down, and now there was one, and she wore his forerunner's keys at her waist, and troubles brought to the right person add and add, until they come to a sum. So she kept her honest work where he could see it, and her ledger where he could not, and she waited. She had learned patience at a dying woman's bedside. She could wait a man out. She did not know that the waiting was nearly done, that a carriage was already on the North Road, and in it a woman colder and cleverer than Crail would ever be, who would look at Iloan once and see, inside a single afternoon, the one thing the steward had missed in 3 long months. Mrs. Cressida Vane came to Aldermere in March, as she had come more and more often since the young lord died, and this time she came meaning to stay. She was the Duke's cousin by his late aunt's marriage, a handsome, hard, bright-eyed woman of 35, born to a great deal more than she now had. Her father had gambled the family portion into the sea. Her husband, Vane, had died and left her a jointure that shrank with every quarter day. She had a plan, and it was the very twin of Crail's, though the two of them would never have owned to the same word for it. She meant to be mistress of Aldermere. If she could not be its duchess, and Emmerich had never once looked at her so, then she would be the power behind its shut door, the devoted cousin who managed a grieving bachelor, who ordered his house and his table, and in the fullness of time his fortune. A great house with no mistress and a broken master was, to a clever and desperate woman, an opportunity dressed up as a family duty. She had chosen Crail years since, or he had chosen her. It came to the same thing. He had smoothed her way to the master. Her small county debts had been settled, quietly, out of the estate's quiet river. Each propped the other, and each understood the danger, and neither had ever said so aloud. She saw it all inside a week, the reviving house, the warm, still room, the worn new path to the kitchen door, and she saw where Crail in 3 months had seen only a prying servant, the one thing that signified that the small brown healer who moved through the house wearing the housekeeper's keys was not merely able, she was hiding. "Coombe," she said one afternoon, sweet over the dowager's tea, turning the name on her tongue like a sugared almond. "From where, I wonder? One does like to place people." "There are Coombes in the West Country, I think. Are you a West Country Coombe?" "Nowhere so grand, ma'am. My father was a poor man of the marsh, a poor man of the marsh. And your mother?" Alowan felt the floor tilt beneath her and kept her face still. "Dead, ma'am. A wise woman. I had my craft of her. A wise woman. How useful. To come with a craft." Mrs. Vane smiled, and her eyes did not smile with her. "And how strange that a marsh healer's girl should turn up half dead in my cousin's woods wearing, so they tell me, a very great deal more than a marsh healer's girl has any business to wear." She sipped her tea. "I watch, Miss Coombe. My cousin thinks me an idle woman, but watching is my one accomplishment, and I am very good at it." "Then you keep sharper books than I do, ma'am," Alowan said, "for I never learned the trick of watching people. Only linen and fevers." From the depths of her chair the dowager made a small sound that, in a lesser woman, would have been a laugh. But Alowan had gone cold to the marrow, for she had met the true enemy at last, and it was not the pink steward. It was this one. Mrs. Vane wasted no time. Among the wreck of her connections was a cousin married to a country attorney, and she set that attorney, in the mild way of country attorneys, to asking after a Wyburn wise woman lately dead and whatever daughter she might have left behind. It would take some weeks, such answers always do. And she went, quietly, to Mr. Gawley, Crail, and found him already frightened, and made him a proposal in the language they both spoke fluently, that a certain girl had grown dangerous to the two of them alike, and had best be gone from the house before she could speak, and gone, moreover, in such a fashion that nothing she ever said afterward would be believed by a living soul. Disgraced, a proven thief, turned out with the family ring itself for a noose. She carries it hidden, Crail said softly. I have never yet found where. Then we shall have her searched, said Mrs. Price. Vane, before witnesses, when the moment serves. A ring does not lie, and a thief, she added, setting down her cup with great gentleness, is not listened to, whatever pretty tale she tells about a steward's books. The moment they chose was the one that came to meet them, as such moments do, in the very middle of everything else. It came on a bright, hard morning in April, when the Duke had company in the house for the first time in 3 years. The Dowager had willed it. A few of the neighboring families to dine, the rector, old Sir Halberd Mead, who sat as magistrate at Netherby, for a house that has learned to breathe again, she said, ought to be made to do it in company. Eloan had opened the great rooms, aired the shut wings, filled the long gallery with the first green boughs of the year. She was crossing the stone hall with an armful of them when Mrs. Praint. Vane's voice rang out from the turn of the stair, pitched to Carrie, sweet and terrible cousin. Before your guests go in, I must beg you to hear a thing that grieves me to the heart to say. It concerns the girl, the healer, the one you carried out of the wood. Everything stopped. The Duke turned from the fire. Crail materialized soft-footed at the passage door. The neighbors drew in close, scenting the thing on the air. It came out all at once, and it came out well, for Mrs. Vane had rehearsed it. This girl was not what the household in its softness had chosen to believe. A marsh wise woman's daughter, come to Aldermere by no honest road. And she had been carrying, hidden upon her person these 3 months and more, the lost betrothal ring of the House of Rathmore, his own dead mother's ring, his own dead brother's troth, and however she had come by it, it had never for 1 hour been hers. "I have held my tongue as long as conscience would let me," said Mrs. Vane, and her voice trembled with a grief so beautifully made that half the room believed it. "But I will not see this house robbed of its own heart by a stranger. Let her be searched, cousin, here, now, before all these witnesses. A ring does not lie. It is true, your grace," said Crail low and sorrowful. "I have suspected it long and said nothing, for who was I to accuse? But there is a ring gone from this house, and the girl was ever near where she had no business. I did not like to think it. God knows I did not like to think it." And the Duke of Rathmore looked at Eloin across the cold hall, and his face was closing as she watched, shutting plank by plank back into the face of that first wet evening, a man looking at a bill he had never expected to be handed. She saw him begin to believe them, to decide that the one person in 3 years who had looked at him without fear had crept in with his dead brother's ring sewn in her hem, exactly as his cousin and his steward said. She saw the still room door swing shut behind his eyes. They sent a maid for her workbox. It was Tibby who was made to fetch it, white-faced and near weeping, and Mrs. Vane herself turned it out upon the long table before them all, and there, worked out of the hem of the shift folded within, on its plain leather cord, was the sapphire ring, the 3 alder leaves, 200 years of red gold. It lay on the dark wood and caught the April light, and a sound went round the hall, and Mrs. Vane's face bloomed into a terrible triumph. But the box had a false bottom, and Tibby, or the rough hands of the searching, had knocked it loose, and out beside the ring slid a thick fold of papers, close written in a small, clear hand. Crail saw them, and for the first time in 3 years his soft, pink face lost its color altogether. He took a half-step toward the table, whether to snatch them up or only to stop them being read, no one ever after could say, and old Sir Halbert Meade, who was a magistrate to the marrow and had been watching the steward's face and not the girl's, put out one dry hand. "Let them lie, Mr. Crail," he said mildly. "I find I should rather like to see them where they are." And Crail stood where he was, and did not sit down again, and the whole hall felt the ground shift a little under its feet. And Eloin Coombe, who had dreaded this moment for the length of her whole careful life, found as she stood among the fallen green boughs that the dread was simply gone. It is a strange thing to fear a moment for years and to arrive inside it at last and find the fear has quietly let go its hold. There was only the truth left, and the truth, at least, was simple. "Every word my lady has spoken is true," she said, and her voice carried clear and level across the hall so that the whispering stopped. "I am Eloin Coombe. My mother was the wise woman of Wyburn, and I am no one, and I have carried this ring hidden upon me since the day your hound brought me out of the frost. I did not steal it. My mother put it into my hand as she was dying, and bade me carry it back to Aldermere, to the Rathmore that keeps faith, and give it into that hand and no other, and tell them who she was. I did not know, when I came, the whole of what that meant. I have learned a great deal of it since." She turned from Mrs. Vane to the Duke, and after that she was aware of no one in the room but him. "I have carried something else these 3 months, your grace." She laid her hand flat on the fold of papers. "These are the true accounts of your estate, in my own hand, set line for line against the accounts Mr. Frakes. Crail posts upon your board, the rents he squeezes from your tenants and never enters, the repairs he charges you for and never makes, the roof above your own east wing, paid for twice out of your purse, and open to the sky this hour, Widow Harlow's cottage, mended on paper 2 years running, and a bucket standing on her floor to catch the wet. It is all here, sworn to, by the men who took your money at the door." She did not let her voice shake. "And there is one thing more. In Mr. Crail's own field book, in his own hand, from the spring your brother died, there is a sum paid out, to see the Wyburn woman gone out of the county, and no more said of it. That woman was my mother. The man who has robbed your house from its roots these 3 years is the very same man who drove her out of it and paid good money to see her forgotten. I could not bring you a rumor. You would not have believed it, and he would have buried me with it. So I built you a reckoning instead, and there it lies." She turned then and looked at Mr. Shirley. Crail, for the first time since she had begun, not in anger, only level, the way she might look at a frightened creature she did not mean to let bolt. "You told me once that some stories are kinder buried, Mr. Crail. This one was not. It was only ever waiting for someone who would not be frightened quiet. For one whole heartbeat, no one in the hall moved. Then Crail laughed, soft and pink and pleasant, and he knew, the instant it was out of his mouth, that it was the wrong thing, for a man does not laugh at a true account. Mrs. Vane had gone very still, and her triumph had drained clean out of her face. And the Duke of Rathmore was no longer looking at Eloan as at a bill he had not expected. He was looking at her the way a drowning man looks at last, at a thrown rope. "Show me," he said. They did it in the library, and it took the rest of that day and half the night. Eloan fetched her fair copies, 3 months of them, the whole slow, patient case, built a shilling at a time from doors and tally sticks and the marks of frightened people. Osric was sent through the wet to bring the tradesmen, and they came in their Sunday coats and laid their own books beside Eloan's, and swore to the figures, the chandler, the corn factor, the carrier, the Netherby mason who had never in his life set a single tile on any roof over any east wing, because no man had paid him to. Nairn brought the tenants up in a farm cart, Widow Harlow on his arm, and they made their marks again before the Duke's own eyes, and told in their plain, frightened voices what they had truly paid, and what had truly been done, which was nothing. When the last of them had gone, the Duke sent Osric to the estate office for the 2 brown books. Crail had spent the evening growing smaller and grayer in his chair, and he made one last soft attempt as the books were laid down. The fair copy was the only true copy, he said. A still-room maid could not be looked to understand the run of a great estate. The Duke opened the worn book beside Eloan's fair copies, and turned the pages in silence, and he understood the whole of it in about 4 minutes, being, as his grandmother had always said, not a fool, but a grieving man, which is a different animal. When he had finished, he was very quiet. He closed the worn book and set his hand flat upon the cover, and when he spoke it was not to Crail at all. "Get out of my house tonight," he said. "You will sleep at Netherby under Sir Halbert's roof, and answer to the bench in the morning. Every figure this lady has taken will go with you. What you have squeezed out of my people you will give back, to the last farthing, and what you cannot give back you will answer for, as the law answers such men." He looked up, and his face was terrible, and awake. "And you will tell me before you go what you did in the spring my brother died, all of it, for I begin to see that I have been a blind man in my own house a great deal longer than 3 years. It came out of Crail in the end, in pieces, the way rot comes out of a beam once the first board is prized. He had been the old Duke's understeward in those days, already dipping his hand where he could, and had seen his whole quiet future put in danger the year Lord Cassian brought home the Wyburn healer, a widow, lowborn, with a young daughter of her own down in the marsh, and swore he would marry her. Such a bride would keep the still room and read the books, and ruin him inside a season. So he forged a letter in the woman's hand, for he had a gift for hands, that made it seem she had taken money to give Cassian up and gone laughing back to the marsh. He carried the coin to frighten her off himself. She flung it in his face and went with nothing but the ring Cassian had given her, and Crail kept the money, struck the line in his book, and let the young lord believe the forgery. And Cassian had not fought the fever that spring, for a man betrayed does not fight very hard to live. The Duke stood a long time with his hand on the shut book. "I carried that letter to my brother," he said at last, "to no one. I was 22, and I thought I knew what an honorable family owed itself, and I put that forged thing into his hand and watched it break him past mending, and I have hated the woman who wrote it for 3 years." He turned to Eloan, and there were no walls left in his face at all. "It was never written. She never wrote a word of it. Your mother never took a penny of that money." "No, your grace," said Eloan, very gently. "She never did. I think that is what she was trying to tell me when she died. Tell them I never." And the breath went out of her before the end of it. Now I know the end of it. I never took his money. I never betrayed him. She carried that, and the ring, and her silence, the whole of her life. And she sent me 200 miles to lay it down at last in the hand of the Rathmore that keeps faith. It was the dowager who answered that from the doorway, where she had sat unnoticed in her chair the whole long night. "Then you have carried it to the right house, child, though not perhaps to the hand you think." The old woman's voice was not quite steady. "I knew Sabine. I liked her. I, who like almost no one. I never once believed the tale they told of her, and I said so, and I was overruled by frightened men, and I have kept her memory these 3 years against the day the truth should walk back up my drive on its own 2 feet. She looked at the ring where it lay on the table between them. "I kept faith. It was a lonely thing to keep. I am very glad to set it down." That left Mrs. Bow. Vane, who had sat through the whole long reckoning in the far corner, upright and handsome and still, watching the engine she had helped to build come apart plank by plank in the candlelight. When Crail had been led away, she rose and made her last throw with the courage of a gambler staking the rent. "You will make a great deal of me now, I suppose," she said. "The loyal cousin who settled her little debts through your steward." "Oh, I knew where the money came from. Do you imagine a woman as poor as I am does not know to the shilling where every kindness comes from? You will turn me out." "Where to, cousin? I have 100 a year and a widow's cap in a county that would relish nothing so well as the sight of me brought low." Her voice was bright and brittle as struck glass, and shaking now. She hid her ring to keep herself alive. "I should have hidden a great deal more than that, to be free of the grinding pretense of being a lady on 100 a year. Do not look at me as though I were a monster. I am only afraid. I have been afraid for 15 years, and it is very tiring, cousin, and you have never once, in your life, not known where you would sleep." The Duke's face had gone hard again, and he opened his mouth, and Eloan knew that what came out of it would be justice, and that justice would be the end of Cressida Vane. "Your Grace," she said, "may I—" He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Eloan crossed the room and stood before the frightened, hateful, upright woman who had turned her out upon the world that very morning, and she did not gloat, for she had learned long ago that gloating is precisely what a tormentor braces to receive, and she had never in her life given a tormentor what they braced for. "You took your debts out of the estate, and that is theft, and you know it," she said quietly. "But you did not forge a dead woman's hand. You did not squeeze Widow Harlow for a shilling at Michaelmas. That was Crail's work, not yours. You watched, and you profited, and you held your tongue, which is the very sin I committed myself until this morning, so I am poorly placed to condemn you for it." She held the bright, terrified eyes. "There is a sound dower house at the edge of the park, standing empty. A woman might live in it decently on 100 a year, and be neither served nor serving, and stop being so very tired, if His Grace is willing. You would owe it to no one, least of all to me. I should like that understood." Mrs. Vane stared at her. Whatever she had braced herself to meet, it had not been this, and it undid her where justice would only have hardened her. "Why?" she said. It was not a graceful question. It was torn out of her. "Because I know exactly how tiring it is," Eloan said. "And because a house that has just cast out one thief ought not to celebrate the morning by making a beggar of another. Good night, Mrs. Vane." The Duke of Rathmore looked at his grandmother's small brown healer across the wreckage of his own long blindness, and something in his face that had been shut since the spring his brother died came quietly and painfully open. They did not mend it all in a night. A house is not a fever. It comes back slowly, and some of it does not come back at all. But it came. By the first warm week of that year, the shut wings stood open. The damp went out of them in pails, and the Netherby mason paid at last the £40 it truly cost, and not a shilling more. Set a new roof over the east wing, so the rain fell outside the house again where rain belongs. What Crail had wrung from the tenants across 3 years was reckoned to the last farthing and carried back, cottage by cottage, where little enough was found on the man himself. The Duke made it good from his own purse, and counted it cheaply bought. Crail answered to the Netherby bench, and then to the assizes, and his soft smile was not seen in that country again. His downfall gave Elowen no pleasure, only the sober quiet of a thing set right. The east wing itself, she and the Duke opened together one bright morning, because he could not do it alone and would not ask another soul. Cassian's rooms had stood sealed 3 years, and among his brother's papers, Emeric found the letters the young lord had written and never sent, to my Sabine, my own heart, and read them with his head bowed, and grieved at last the honest grief he had never let himself feel, the kind that heals because it is finally let into the light. Elowen sat with him and said nothing, and kept the whole house breathing while he wept, which is a healer's truest work, and the one no one ever sees. They cleared the frozen physic garden that spring and planted it new, and Elowen set at the head of it a grey stone for a woman who had no grave at Aldermere. Sabine, it read, Who kept faith, and the dowager came out on her grandson's arm to see it done, and wept exactly once, and pronounced that the proper allowance for any sensible woman. And the county talked, of course, of the Duke of Rathmore seen walking his own land again with a marsh healer at his side, and his dead brother's hound at her heel. It talked loudest of all on the summer evening. He crossed the whole length of his own reopened hall, before every family in the district, and stopped in front of his grandmother's small brown companion in her plain grey gown, and bowed to her as a man bows to a woman. He means the world to remark, and asked her, so that a great many people heard it, whether she would walk out with him. She had not thought, when she came, to be looked at by anyone at all. He gave it back to her that evening at the edge of the new planted garden, with Sabine's stone pale in the dusk beside them, not as a keepsake. He took the sapphire ring from his own pocket, for it was his to give, the troth of his house, 200 years of it, and he held it out on his open palm in the last of the light. This was meant for a woman, my family wronged past all mending, he said. I cannot give it back to her. I would give it, if she will have it, to her daughter, who is owed a great deal more than a ring by this house, and who has never yet asked it for one thing. His voice went quiet, right down to the bone. I will not offer you a marriage of convenience, Elowen. You have a craft of your own and a name of your own. Cleared now and honored, and you need no man's house to shelter under. In a year you might go anywhere in England and be welcome. You do not need me. That is precisely why I am asking. Not because the house wants a mistress. It has had one since February, whatever anyone chose to call her. Because I should like, for the rest of my life, to be looked at by the one person who was never once afraid of me. Marry me as myself, choosing it or do not, and stay and run the house. I could not, and I will never trouble you with it again. It is entirely yours to say. Everything, from here, is yours to say. Elowen looked at the ring on his open hand, and then at the man behind it, and she thought of the wet frostwood, and the old hound, and the 3 years she had meant to spend invisible and safe. Safe was a small word. She had been safe her whole careful life. She had never once, until this house, been seen, and she had learned that winter that being seen by the right person was not the danger she had spent her life fleeing. It was the only safety worth the name. Emeric, she said, She had never used his name. He heard her use it. "Nothing mends in the dark," she said. "You told me once you had signed your name to a great deal. You never read. I will marry you. As yourself, choosing it, on the one condition that we neither of us ever again leave a thing shut up in the dark to rot, whether it be a roof, or a grief, or a wrong done 3 years gone. Everything into the light. I have grown very tired of holding my tongue." The almost smile was on her own mouth now, and she could not help it. "Yes, that is a yes, Your Grace. In case a duke requires it, read aloud." He laughed. It was not a sound that Country had heard from him in a very long time, and it carried across the quiet garden, and the old hound lifted his gray head at the sound of it, and thumped his tail once against the earth. By high summer, Eloan ran the whole house, and there was no one left in 3 counties who called it anything but what it was. The rents came in fair, into a single honest book kept in her own hand. The tenants' roofs were sound. Mrs. Tad Vane lived in the dower house at the park's edge, and, being clever, proved far better at ordering a still room than at watching for other people's false steps, and the 2 women arrived in time at the particular respect of those who have both known how tiring it is to be poor and proud in the same skin. The dowager lived 2 summers more to see the house full again, and died in her chair in the south parlor on a bright autumn morning, with her spine straight to the last, which was the one grief those summers could not mend, for the dead do not come back, because the living have learned to be happy. But the physic garden grew, and Sabine's name stood clear on its gray stone, and the ring the frost had carried up the drive one winter morning sat now on the hand it should have graced years before, only a generation too late. As for the old hound, Osric, who had wondered at it longest, came in time to understand, and told no one but himself. Bracken had never cared a jot for Rathmore blood, whatever the servants' hall had believed. He had known, that frozen morning in the frostwood, only the one scent his dead master had loved, above every other in the world, carried 3 counties and a generation onward in the daughter of the woman Cassian would have wed. On a warm evening at the end of that first full summer, the Duke of Rathmore came looking for his wife, and found her where his old hound had already led him. In the still room, in the last of the light, the great honest account book open and unread upon her knee, not working, only sitting with it, the way a person sits with a thing that has finally, after a long cold while, come right. "You have run the whole of it into good order," he said from the doorway. "There is nothing left in this house that wants mending. Whatever will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" She looked up at him, level and gray and unafraid. The very way she had looked at him from the wet gravel of the frostwood on the first hour of the first day, when he had told his steward she would not last the week. "Oh, I shall find something," she said. "I always do. I cannot abide a thing left to rot that might yet be healed. It is my besetting fault. You knew it when you asked." The almost smile. "Come and sit down. You are drowning in that doorway again." He came, and he sat down. Bracken sighed and shifted against the warm hearth. The candle burned, and the house breathed quietly around the 3 of them, mended, honest, and full. A house that had held its breath for a very long time, and had at last, that summer, been allowed to let it go. She had come to Aldermere to disappear. She had ended the most thoroughly seen woman in the county, and she had found to her own great astonishment the thing her mother had spent a whole silent life trying to tell her, that nothing worth keeping ever mends in the dark, and that to be truly seen by the one who keeps faith, it is the beginning of it.